Hi there, it's Rose here with a scallydandle to the Marshall Islands in the company of Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner and her poetry collection, Jaltok, or Poems from a Marshallese Daughter, which was published in 2017 and is the first book of poetry published by an author from the Marshall Islands. Now, scallydandles, for me are when I talk about books that I read as part of my long-term personal project to read a book by an author from every country in the world. And sometimes, these videos are really going to primarily be of interest to other people that are trying to do a bit of a read around the world challenge of some kind. But I have to say, this collection of poetry by Jetnil-Kijiner is a book that I would really love to encourage other people to read who aren't just reading it because they're looking for something from the Marshall Islands, because Kijiner is a really accomplished poet, I would say, but she made me realize how appallingly, really, the Marshall Islands and the Marshallese have been treated by the world in the particularly in the 20th and 21st centuries, not least by being a key nuclear testing ground for the Americans in the middle of the 20th century, and now being threatened by sea level rises due to the climate emergency. So, and Kijiner really, she's using her talent as a poet to and her conviction as I suppose as a sort of environmental activist to speak out for the Marshallese and their experience. Now, I will start these videos with a little bit of sort of history and geography, I guess. Let's start by finding the Marshall Islands, for those of you that aren't from that neck of the woods. And globe, as ever. Okay, so if you see, we've got Australia there, and the Philippines here. Okay, so if we work our way across from the Philippines and Australia, heading in the direction of Hawaii there, kind of halfway between the two are the Marshall Islands. They're here. So there's the Marshall Islands, as I say, there's Australia, there's Hawaii. And they're like an archipelago of nearly 1,000 islands and coral atolls, 5 substantial islands and about 29 sort of more significant coral atolls that are or were habitable, only 24 inhabited now for reasons that will become clear. So that's where we are. Pop that down. Bit of history. So, one more bit of geography before I move on. In case you're not aware of what coral atolls are like, or haven't thought that through, the average height above sea level of the whole of this country, the whole country of the Marshall Islands, is just a fraction over 2 meters. Okay, yeah, so stop and let that register in the context of climate change and sea level rises. Okay, so history. The Marshall Islands were like sort of all of remote Oceania, populated around, exact date's not certain, but by sort of a wave of migrating, extraordinary seafaring people that we kind of refer to as the Austronesians, and they were the world's most extraordinary pre-modern navigators who crossed, vast stretches of the ocean, originated probably in sort of Taiwan, but possibly also Southeast Asia, and, as I say, sort of almost like island hop across. But that sounds, island hopping sounds like it's a short distance, whereas these were huge distances that they had to navigate. And, as I say, they populated Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands is part of that. So, and the Marshallese retained those extraordinary sort of seafaring and ocean-going navigation skills, so right up to close to modern times, when European colonisation kind of disrupted things, I suppose. So when did the Europeans turn up? In the 16th century, Spanish explorers kind of dropped by, bringing very unfortunately unfamiliar infectious diseases, but not much else. Then in 1788, an British sea captain, John Charles Marshall, charted some of the islands. He was just after dropping a load of convicts at Botany Bay in Australia, and that's how the Marshall Islands get their name, from him. But didn't stop. So it was a random reason to be named after him, really. Notionally, they were part of the Spanish overseas empire because they were in the sort of Spanish sphere of share of the world, as when it was split between Spanish and Portugal notionally, but the Spanish never really settled there. I mean, they just didn't. And whalers might have sort of passed by in the early 19th century and so on, might drop off and pick up food and might get attacked by the islanders or not, depending on how well behaved they were. The islands carried on being run by the local chiefs, as they always had been. Interestingly, a matrilinear society in terms of inheritance of land and property, but with male chiefs. Yeah. Middle of the 19th century, copra, or which is like dried coconut, becomes a significant commodity, and so the Germans kind of settle on the islands to exploit the coconut as a product, and they sign treaties with local chiefs, and but in 1885 they kind of take control from the Spanish, and it becomes the Marshall Islands become what's called a German protectorate. I don't know what, it's these very nice words. Oh, it's sort of protectorate, as if they were protecting them. Well, they weren't. They were using them. But 1914, First World War, Japanese move in, take control of the islands. And after World War I, they were allocated to Japan under the League of Nations mandate, another nice word, which meant, of course, that in World War II, the Americans invaded to take them off Japan in 1944. And after World War II, they became part of the US Pacific Island Trust territory under the sort of United Nations, divvying up of the world, And that's when things go really badly wrong for them, because between 1946 and 1958, there were 67 nuclear weapons tested in the Marshall Islands. Bikini Atoll is the sort of the famous location, I guess, for this. There was another atoll. It was just the first hydrogen bomb that was tested there. Basically, completely, it disappeared. The whole little island gone underwater. By the mid-50s, the Marshall Islands were the most radioactivity contaminated place in the world. And that meant that islanders were permanently evacuated from some islands. And Jetnil-Kijiner, in her poems, really kind of explores, digs into, examines the impact of displacement on Marshallese lives, but also the health impacts of that kind of nuclear contamination. There's a wonderful poem in the collection which is called the History Project, and at age 15, she was at school in Hawaii. A lot of Marshallese, there's quite a significant Marshallese population in Hawaii now. She later moved back to the Marshall Islands, but she was at school in Hawaii, and for her history project, she decided to research the history of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands and its impact. Okay, and I'm going to read you a tiny bit from from partway through this poem. Okay, so I flipped through snapshots of American Marines and nurses branded white with bloated grins, sucking beers and tossing beach balls along our shores, and my islander ancestors cross-legged before a general, listening to his fairy tale about how it's for the good of mankind to hand over our islands, let them blast radioactive energy into our sleepy coconut trees, our sagging breadfruit trees, our busy fishes that sparkle like new sun into our coral reefs, brilliant as an aurora borealis woven beneath a glassy sea. God will thank you, they told us. Okay, later in the poem, she says how she used those words for the good of mankind as like the title for her project. And these, I'll read you this last little bit. Okay, my parents were quietly proud and so was my teacher. But when the 3 balding white judges finally came around to my project, one of them looked at it and said, yeah, but it wasn't really for the good of mankind though, was it? And I lost. It was like a competition. Yeah, good stuff. So, back to our Marshall Islands history. By the time Jetnil-Kijiner was born in 1989, they were self-governing, and around the time that she was born, they became independent, but part of what's called a Compact of Free Association with the United States. So that means that, they agreed to carry on have a missile testing base there. They get kind of compensation and US aid. And again, this is something she writes about because, she writes about the impact of I don't know, eating, the spam and biscuits that come through US sort of food aid has, rather than, a more traditional diet. And, there's a brilliant poem about a kind of uncle who's diabetic and but why wouldn't you eat spam, if you're offered it, and biscuits, and the fact that it's killing you. Yeah. It's very, I suppose, symbolic of, I don't know, a kind of a dependency that has developed in sort of Marshallese culture that they're having to then sort of fight their way out of, I suppose. She, as I say, was born in the Marshall Islands, educated in Hawaii, then now moved back to live in the Marshall Islands again. In the 21st century, the Marshall Islands, they should be moving on, but now they have a new disastrous threat, which again she explores in her poetry, which is that of climate change. And I've talked about sea levels rising, but also more typhoons, drought, and as sea levels rise, even just a bit, the sort of normal high tides, what they call king tides, have breach defences and flood areas that would never previously have flooded, and fresh water sort of underground water sources are salinated, and she is understandably passionate about this, and she uses, her poetry as part of her activism. But, I would say that as a as a collection, one of its strengths, I suppose, one of the things that she does really cleverly is that she doesn't just write doom and gloom. She's writing about the richness and colour and beauty and delights of Marshallese culture, because what she wants us to understand is what would be lost if the Marshall Islands ultimately have to be evacuated because, sea levels rise too high and, no one can live there anymore. Because when you are displaced, your culture, you may try to maintain it, but it's dissipated and damaged. Wonderful book, warmly recommend it. And if anyone out there has also read it, please share your thoughts in the comments, because I would love to hear from someone else that has read this book.